If you are a Master Rank player in TFT, you are amongst the top 0.3% of all players. Master players have critical knowledge that more than 99% of all TFT players don't have. But don't worry, I am from the top 0.3%, and in this video I will teach you 5 advanced tips that you can use in every game, so you can climb up in the ranks with the rest of us. The first tip is to make a plan, stick to that plan, and not be afraid of contesting other players. This is something I notice a lot when coaching Platinum and Low Diamond players. The first step is to actually have a plan, and you should already have one ready to go while you are in the loading screen. In other words, you need a comp to default to at the start of every game, which means you have a comp that you will always play towards until the game gives you something different. Everyone has comps they like playing, so just pick any one of those to default towards. This can, for example, be Cannoneer Corki, meaning that at the start of every game, you will basically force Cannoneer Corki. In other words, you are always buying Trainers, Cannoneers, and Bruisers on stage 1 if you see them. But if you get a shop with an Ezreal pair and a Leona, then you might want to go for Jade reroll instead, as you have a better opener for that comp. Now consider you hit Bruisers and Cannoneers, and you are playing them throughout the early game, which leads you to having this board on stage 3. Here you are in a great spot to play Corki. You have a lot of the champions and items you need for the comp, but then you scout the lobby and you see that there is one other person playing Cannoneer Corki. What do you do from here? First up, you need to answer these 2 questions. How many players can my comp, which is Cannoneer Corki in this example, support? And is there another comp we can pivot to and still be in a good spot? Cannoneer Corki, like most other forecast carry comps, can support 2 to 3 players, so as long as there are only 2 people going for it, we are fine, and we can pretty much ignore the fact that there is another person playing it. To answer the other question, we need to look at our board. Here we have made Giant Slayer and Last Whisper. This means we want to play an AD carry this game. Here are all the late game AD carries in set 7. Now we need to do a process of elimination to remove the ones that can't use Giant Slayer paired with Last Whisper, and we are left with just 3. Since we are questioning pivoting out of Corki, we are left with only Xayah and Talon. The next step is to look at our augments, and do the same process of elimination to check if Xayah or Talon can use our current augments. If both of them can, we have to go back to our stage 3 board. Looking at this, it will be hard to pivot into Talon, as we don't have any assassins, guilds, or cavaliers, meaning we will have to roll a lot more gold for the Talon comp when we transition into it. Therefore, playing Talon from here is not ideal. Now we do the exact same analysis with Xayah. We already have some Rage Wings which help, but we don't have any other Swift Shots, and we don't have any other Shapeshifters or Cavaliers either. So it's not as bad as transitioning into Talon, but it's definitely not ideal. If there was 2 or 3 other Corki players in the lobby, pivoting to Xayah here would have been the play. But when there's only one, then we stick to our plan and contest the Corki player, since we have great items and we have a great mid to late game transition for him. What I mean by this is that I see a lot of players pivoting into comps they don't really have items or augments for, and by pivoting into an uncontested comp, they're not only letting the other person play uncontested, but they are also putting themselves in a worse situation as they would be better off just contesting. So the next time someone contests you, remember your plan and answer these 2 questions before you pivot. The best way to improve is to realize why you won or lost the current fight, because that is the key to diagnosing the weaknesses and strengths of your current board. There are 2 parts to recognizing why you won or lost. The first part is to evaluate whether you're stronger than your opponent on paper. The other part is recognizing if you had good or bad positioning. Judging the strength of a comp on paper is hard to do and requires you to have analyzed hundreds of thousands of games. And as a single human, you're simply not capable of that. But that's where Meta TFT comes in. With their new update, the app will show your odds for winning before every fight. For example, here, I have a 44% chance to win against the Varus player. And as you'll see, this one is really close and it will be decided by some fight RNG and the positioning of the units. As of today, Meta TFT doesn't factor in positioning to their win percentage calculation, so it's fantastic for getting a feel of if you positioned well or not. If you want to download this app to get the feature yourself, click the link in the description or in the pinned comment. Here's a snapshot of the fight we just watched right after the assassins jumped. Try and see if you can spot what went right and wrong here, and then judge whether we won because of fight RNG or because we positioned well. To start off, Olaf is our main carry here, so we need to keep him safe so he can deal as much damage as possible, but we also need to make sure the enemy Varus is doing as little damage as possible. Olaf will start off by running into the Frozen Heart Illaoi, and he doesn't have QSS. Our assassins also jumped the wrong side, so things aren't looking great for us. But the enemy Varus will target our Braum, which means that he will not be doing any damage while that shield is up. So at this point, it's all about whether Illaoi dies before our frontline does. because once Alawi dies, this fight is pretty much over since Olaf won't get his attack speed slowed. If we play out the fight, we can see that Braum held out for a good 8 seconds, Alawi is at 40% HP roughly, and we still have 4 other tanks before Varus gets to Olaf. From there, Olaf gets through the backline and is alone against 4 units. Since he is very tanky and has healing, he's able to barely clutch it out. I would say that my positioning was not the worst, but it could be better. I made sure Varus dealt little damage, but I also got my carry stuck on a Frozen Heart. Therefore, I would conclude that fight RNG was on my side this fight, and it's probably what made me win. So let's recap what we learned from this. When it comes to Olaf versus a comp with ranged carries, having your assassins jump the correct side is not super important as we just saw. What is more important is making sure your frontline is being targeted before Olaf. Additionally, making sure Olaf stays away from Frozen Hearts at all costs is important. It might seem like I'm stating the obvious here, but making these realizations are incredibly important if you want to grow as a player. Whenever I play Olaf, I have now learned that I should always scout for Frozen Hearts in the frontline so that I can position in a way where I get Olaf at a range from that Frozen Heart, while also having my frontline be targeted before the Olaf. So let's do that with this example. Here I tried a different approach where I swapped sides and I now realized that my positioning might have been good after all. Here Olaf will still path towards the Alawi, but now he has put himself in a worse angle towards the Varus. Here Braum and Shen will walk into the enemy bruisers, while my other tanks will go to the Alawi. When Braum, Shen and Ornn dies, Olaf is the next one to get targeted, meaning Lilia and Hecarim don't get to do their job as tanks. So now we have broken one of the learnings from the last fight, which was that having your main carry be the last to die is very important. This was a very complicated way of showcasing how complicated positioning can be, and that positioning is all about trade-offs. We have also now learned that there is no way for Olaf to not get CC'd by solo frontline Alawis with Frozen Heart, so we just have to take the L on that one, and then position the best with that in mind. That was a lot of talking about just one fight, so let me know if that was helpful or if it was too complicated. And if you want to use this feature yourself, check out TFT in the description or in the pinned comment. One important thing to understand before you pick augments and make items is to understand which interactions make your comp strong. If you look at the Jade reroll comp, how does this board win any rounds? Here Ezreal is our main carry, and he has 2 traits active, one being Swift Shot and the other being Tempest. Tempest gives him more attack speed after 9 seconds, so we need a frontline that can last at least 9 seconds plus some extra seconds to actually get value from the trait. Swift Shot works like Sniper from previous sets. The farther away from enemy champions you are, the more attack speed the Swift Shots get. Now if you were to pick 3 more items to place on the board, and 3 augments, which ones would you pick? You want to get 3 tank items to make your frontline stronger, since a strong frontline lets us maximize the value we get from both Tempest and Swift Shot. We put those on Leona since her spell makes her more tanky and scales with tank items, and she also has 2 Guardian, which is a defensive synergy to make her even more tanky. If we place these on Xiao Yu or Lee Sin, we would get less value from them, since both of their spells scales with damage like AP, and both of their spells also deal damage instead of making themselves more tanky. Augments are unreliable. Since there are around 100 augments in total, we will get different ones every game. But in an ideal scenario, we would pick 1 healing augment so that Ezreal doesn't die from splash damage, and we pick 2 defensive augments to further increase the strength of our frontline, which results in more value from Swift Shot and Tempest on Ezreal. Items and augments are 2 different but very similar ways of making your board stronger, so whenever you pick an augment, you need to look at what items you have already made, what items you're planning on making, and also what your carry and team needs. Let me further explain this with an example. Olaf is a champion that needs some form of healing on him, whether it's from items like BT or from augments like Celestial Blessing. One way to get a 4th item on Olaf is to grab healing augments when we can, and then drop BT for another damage item. Or we can drop BT for Hodge to give us a little bit of healing, while also getting more damage from the Hodge. Using augments like this can be incredibly powerful in certain situations. Say you've made Giant Slayer and QSS, and you have a Tear and Glove on bench. If you get offered Celestial Blessing and you're planning on playing Olaf, it will be insanely good as now you can slam Hodge on the same turn and effectively get a BT with more damage onto Olaf. But on the other hand, if you are in the same situation and you have a sword on your bench, then Celestial Blessing might not be the best, as you want to consider your other options in that case, since you will likely get a cloak from future carousels or from the Treasure Dragon. Another thing augments lets us do is build Olaf more defensive. If we have a lot of damage augments like Warrior Heart or Tiamat, then we can drop 1 damage item and go for a more defensive approach like Rageblade, BT, and QSS, since we get more damage onto Olaf through the augments. Remember that items and augments work together in harmony. So look at your items before you pick augments, and look at your augments before you pick items. In every single TFT game, you will always press the reroll button to refresh your shops, and a lot of you might just hit the button without thinking too much about it. This can cost you a lot of gold if you roll too much, or it can lose you a lot of HP if you don't roll through enough gold. There is one way to make sure you roll the appropriate amount though, and that is to have an ILP before you roll. ILP stands for Intention, Limit, and Potential Pivot. Your intention should be clear before you roll. What exact units are you looking for? And what is your reason for rolling in the first place? Is it to hit your pairs and to make them 2-star? Are you bleeding out and you need to power spike? Are you looking to complete a synergy? Or do you need direction towards a comp? It is crucial to always plan ahead in TFT, so never press that D key before you have your intention clear. Your limit means how deep you're willing to roll. Gold is a limited resource in TFT, and the more gold we have, the easier it is to get more gold. In other words, if we roll too deep, we will fall behind the lobby in terms of econ. To know your limit, you need to think back at your intention for rolling. Someone who's bleeding out and has a really weak board will have to roll through a lot more gold than someone who's just looking to hit a couple of pairs. Your potential pivots refers to which other comps and carries you can play this game. If you've made 80 items and you're planning on playing Talon, but you see a Xayah in your shop when you're rolling, then you can probably pivot to Xayah or use her as an item carrier for Talon in most cases. By being aware of our potential pivots, we are making sure we don't miss out on any big opportunities. The next tip is how to change our board, which is also known as transitioning. The larger the transition, the more complicated it gets, but you always want to follow these steps whenever you want to transition. The first step is to be aware of which champions you are going to be keeping on your board, and also be aware of which units you want to put in. Additionally, you want to prepare your ILP that we talked about earlier. Mentally preparing yourself is important, so that you don't hesitate and start asking yourself questions mid-transition when you only have 30 seconds to act. Step 2. Once the round starts, you want to sell off the units you don't need and then put the units you need onto your board. This is mostly to clear up our bench space, as having a bench full of junk will destroy your ability to roll through your gold effectively. Step 3. Start rolling for the champions and 2-stars you need. Remember your ILP from earlier and stick to your plan while rolling. When there is about 10 seconds left, you need to keep rolling if you still haven't hit your important units, but if you already hit most of what you need, stop and start with step 4, which is to fix positioning. You don't have time to start scouting, so you just want to get general positioning down. This is stuff like just making sure that your tanks are on the front line and that your backliners are safe behind your tanks. Once you have fixed all of that, you can either keep rolling if you still have some pairs left to hit, or move on to step 5, which is to place items. I've talked a lot about the importance of items, but the reason why placing items is the last step is because we can place items during the middle of the fight, but we cannot hit 2-stars or positioning during the fight. The only thing is if you're notorious for fat fingering and placing items on the wrong champions, then you might want to place items during the last couple of seconds in the planning phase instead. Another thing to note is that you want to prioritize placing items that give benefits at the start of the fight first, such as Chalice, Zeke's, Banshee's Claw, Locket, QSS, Zephyr, Shroud, and Rageblade. The longer you wait before placing these, the less value you get out of them, and for some of them you get absolutely no value. For some of you, this will sound complicated, and most of you might not get all the steps right the first couple of times you try, but keep in mind that transitioning is one of the few skills in TFT that actually requires mechanics. Being able to roll fast and quickly sell units takes muscle memory and practice, so this will take time, but once you get it down, you will be better than the vast majority of players, and maybe you'll even become a part of the top 0.3% club. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Comment down below what video you want me to make next, and if you want to get better at TFT, join the Discord. We got over 7,000 other players there who are hungry to climb. And if you want to get coached by me, the information is over on the Discord server as well. So take care and see you in the next video.